My name's Hannah Emerson. I'm 34 years old, a professional event photographer based in Los Angeles. Taking pictures isn't just my job, it's how I see the world, how I understand people, and how I capture moments that might otherwise slip away. For over a decade now, I've built my career around weddings and lifestyle shoots, carving out a reputation for reliability, creativity, and a quiet professionalism that clients trust implicitly. I've photographed hundreds of weddings, big and small, but the ones that always mattered most were the ones within my own family. The Emersons are a large, ambitious family. We come from a long line of high achievers, social climbers, and perfectionists who put a lot of energy into appearances and social standing. Weddings are enormous, elaborate affairs, lavish events where every detail is scrutinized and every smile is measured. You'd think, given my skills and the years I've invested, that I'd be an indispensable part of those celebrations. And, for the most part, I was. I was the unofficial family photographer, the one everyone called when they needed someone who could not only capture the day, but also make it look polished and perfect. I wasn't just good at my job. I was family. But being family wasn't always enough. On the surface, I kept attending family gatherings, always with my camera in hand, ready to document their milestones. I wanted to stay connected, to be part of the moments that mattered. Yet beneath the smiles, there was tension, an undercurrent of something unspoken. It felt like I was always on the outside looking in, a bit too visible, and yet somehow invisible at the same time. My cousin Morgan, the golden child of the family, always managed to shine brighter. She was charismatic and socially magnetic, the one everyone wanted to be around. Morgan's life was a series of social events and carefully curated moments, and her upcoming wedding was poised to be the biggest, most extravagant event the family had ever hosted. When the news broke about Morgan's $650,000 wedding, I was genuinely excited. I wanted to help. I thought this was my moment to step up and prove that I belonged, not just as a photographer, but as a sister, a cousin, a part of the family fabric. I imagined myself behind the lens, capturing every detail, every laugh, every tear. I pictured the smiles on everyone's faces as they flipped through the wedding album, seeing the day unfold through my eyes. I even started brainstorming ideas for the shoot, unique angles, candid moments, artistic lighting. I felt proud and hopeful. This was an opportunity to reconnect, to be recognized, but that hope was short-lived. The shock came like a punch to the gut. Out of nowhere, I was excluded from the guest list. Not just excluded, but outright banned from attending Morgan's wedding. The reason given? That I was too pretty, and that my presence might overshadow the bride and disrupt the dream wedding. The words stung. It wasn't just about being left out. It was about being seen as a threat, a problem to be managed rather than a family member to be cherished. I remember sitting there, stunned, scrolling through the lavish wedding invitations everyone else had received. Every cousin, every distant relative, my brother, all invited except me and my small family. The ornate invitation cards, usually a symbol of inclusion and celebration, now felt like cold reminders of my exclusion. Despite everything I'd done for the family, the countless hours photographing birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, the quiet support I gave behind the scenes, it all seemed to vanish in an instant. The unspoken message was clear. I wasn't welcome. Not really. I wanted to understand how things had come to this, but more than that, I wanted to find a way to respond, to reclaim my place, not just in the family, but in my own story. And that's where everything started to unravel. Looking back now, the roots of this family dysfunction stretch far deeper than any single event. It's like a slow-burning undercurrent that shaped how I was seen, and never quite accepted, as one of them. Morgan, my cousin, was the family's shining star from the very beginning. She had this effortless charisma that seemed to command attention the moment she walked into a room. Everyone adored her. The family matriarch, Aunt Janice, doted on Morgan as if she were a rare jewel. And even my mother, Victoria, seemed to bask in Morgan's reflected glow. It was as if Morgan carried the family's hopes and ambitions on her polished shoulders. From our childhood days, I remember how Morgan was always the first to be praised. Teachers would commend her in front of the class, Relatives would gush over her accomplishments, from dance recitals to school honors. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the good girl, who did her part, but rarely stood out. My efforts were often taken for granted or overlooked entirely. If I made a mistake, a spilled drink at a family party, a forgotten birthday greeting, it was magnified. I was the scapegoat for any minor mishap, the one who had to apologize and fix things quietly, while Morgan received bouquets of praise. I recall one particular family gathering when I was about 10 years old. Morgan had just won a local beauty pageant, and the whole room buzzed with excitement. I had accidentally knocked over a vase while trying to get a better look at the trophy display. The crash silenced the room. My mother pulled me aside, whispering sharply that I was being careless and that Morgan's moment was being tainted by my clumsiness. I remember feeling small, ashamed. But Morgan? She was glowing, surrounded by admirers and flashing cameras. It was like two entirely different worlds existed in the same room, and I was caught in the shadows. As we grew older, the pattern didn't change much. Morgan was the social butterfly, always at the center of attention. Prom queens, charity galas, summer parties with the elite crowd. She knew how to work the room, how to charm, and how to carefully craft her image. Morgan's life was an endless stream of invitations, fancy dresses, and carefully curated photos for social media. The family celebrated her not just for who she was, but for what she represented: status, success, and the kind of glamour that elevated the Emerson name. Me? I stayed behind the scenes. I was the one who documented those moments, who captured the smiles and the sparkle through my camera lens. I was proud of my work and the role I played, but I also felt the subtle sting of exclusion. I'd sit quietly at family dinners as conversations revolved around Morgan's latest engagement or her newest business venture. My own achievements quietly sidelined or met with polite nods. If I ever dared to share a personal win, it was quickly overshadowed by a story of Morgan's latest social triumph. Looking back, I realize how normalized it all became. I excused the favoritism as family quirks, convincing myself that everyone deserved their moment in the sun, and maybe my time would come. I tried to see Morgan's success as something to celebrate rather than resent. But beneath the surface, doubt and quiet resentment grew like a seed taking root in my heart. The more I gave to the family, through photography, emotional labor, even financial help, the less I felt seen or valued. I was invisible in a world that flaunted Morgan's spotlight. Even my mother's role was complicated. Victoria, protective in her own way, often seemed blind to the emotional toll this dynamic took on me. She would gently chide me for making things about myself, or tell me to choose peace, urging me to keep the peace at all costs. But her allegiance to Morgan was unmistakable. She would defend Morgan's decisions with unwavering loyalty, even when those choices hurt me. It was as if my pain was a side effect of preserving the family's perfect facade. Looking back at those years, I'm struck by how carefully the family curated an image of harmony and success, while quietly sidelining anyone who disrupted that narrative. Morgan's life was a polished story with no room for imperfections, or for me, and I was expected to smile, to help tell that story, even when it meant erasing my own. That long history of favoritism and exclusion set the stage for what was to come. It was more than sibling rivalry or jealousy. It was about power and control, about who got to be seen and who had to stay in the shadows. And as much as I tried to fit in, to be the good daughter, cousin, and photographer, I was always reminded that my place was somewhere just out of the spotlight. But somewhere along the way, the hurt started to become clearer and harder to ignore, and that clarity would change everything. Over the years, I poured so much of myself into supporting the Emerson family's milestones, often at the expense of my own dreams. It wasn't just about snapping photos. It was about being the invisible thread holding these celebrations together. I financed events quietly, helping cover unexpected costs for family birthdays, anniversaries, and especially weddings. I remember slipping checks into Victoria's purse when she fretted about catering bills, or subtly covering deposits for floral arrangements when Morgan's elaborate plans threatened to spiral out of budget. I did it without fanfare, not seeking thanks or recognition, because family was supposed to be a team, right? But that was the problem. I was always on the sidelines, quietly propping up the family's image while they basked in the glow. I carried the weight of responsibility for more than just photography. When Aunt Janice's health started to decline, I stepped in to care for her, coordinating medical appointments and providing emotional support. I was there during late-night calls with Mom, consoling her through Aunt Janice's worsening condition. I juggled these duties alongside my career and my young daughter Lily, who watched me slip away to family events I hoped would bring us closer. On top of that, I tried to shield Mark and Lily from the family's underlying coldness. Mark was supportive, but increasingly frustrated by how distant the Emersons were to us. I remember a Thanksgiving dinner when Lily shyly asked why Grandma Victoria didn't smile much at her. It broke my heart to explain that sometimes family dynamics were complicated. Mark tried to advocate for us quietly, but even he could see the walls closing in. Despite this, I pressed on. When Morgan announced her engagement, I offered to handle all the visual elements of the wedding, from the save the dates to the final album, free of charge. I imagined myself crafting a visual narrative that celebrated Morgan's happiness, but also subtly hoped it would remind the family of my place within it. I spent countless late nights designing mood boards and scouting locations for pre-wedding shoots, dreaming of the moment I would finally be fully included, not just as a helper, but as a recognized part of this family story. What made it harder was how my contributions were often taken for granted or overlooked altogether. At meetings to plan wedding details, my suggestions were politely heard but rarely acted upon. When I delivered proofs of family events, my photos were credited to the photographer rather than to me personally. Even the smallest suggestions for improving social media posts were ignored or passed over in favor of Morgan's glamorous influencers. It was as if my work was valued only insofar as it served their image, but not as an extension of myself. And yet, I continued to give, because I clung to hope that recognition was just around the corner. But the emotional labor went beyond finances and photos. I was the family's emotional glue, smoothing over tensions and keeping peace whenever disagreements flared. I mediated disputes between cousins, listened patiently to Aunt Janice's grievances, and tried to reassure Mom when she confided worries about Morgan's wedding stresses. I was the one who organized last-minute rehearsal dinners, booked hotel blocks, and ensured every detail was accounted for, all while juggling a full schedule of paying clients and caring for my family. Every sacrifice I made felt like another brick in the wall I built around myself, a wall that I hoped would eventually protect my place in the family's heart. But the more I gave, the more invisible I became. It was like standing in a spotlight that only illuminated others. Meanwhile, Morgan's life unfolded like a glossy magazine spread. Her world was full of designer gowns, celebrity guests, and carefully staged photo ops. I was proud of her in many ways. Her achievements were impressive, but I couldn't deny the sting that came from knowing my own hard work was overshadowed by her carefully crafted image. And my own ambitions? They quietly faded into the background. I postponed expanding my photography business beyond family events. I said no to potential clients who conflicted with family schedules. I sidelined personal projects, telling myself that supporting the Emersons was more important. I kept my camera ready for their moments, but rarely for my own. Mark saw the toll it took. He often reminded me gently that my worth wasn't tied to their approval, but it was hard to hear through the noise of exclusion and subtle slights. Lily, too, absorbed the family dynamics in ways no child should. I worried about what message we were sending her, that family could be conditional, that love might depend on how brightly you shined or how well you fit the mold. Still, I convinced myself that my sacrifices were investments in something bigger, a family legacy, a network of love and support that would eventually include me fully. I imagined the pride I'd feel seeing my photographs on every wall, hearing thanks for the moments only I could capture. But deep down, I was exhausted, and maybe a little scared that the acceptance I craved might never come. When Morgan announced her wedding plans with all their grandeur and the family began preparing for what was to be the event of the year, I doubled down. I offered up my professional services again and again, sometimes at the cost of missing opportunities to grow my own brand outside the family. I volunteered to organize the family's group photos, to manage post-production, and to handle social media content, all free of charge. Yet, no matter how much I gave, the cold distance never thawed. It was as if my presence was only tolerated so long as I remained quietly in the background. The unspoken tension lingered, like a shadow waiting to fall. And then, without warning, it did. That Sunday brunch was supposed to be a celebration, a gathering of close family to share in Morgan's wedding news. The Emersons had gathered at Aunt Janice's sprawling estate, the kind of place where every detail was curated. Crystal chandeliers sparkling above polished mahogany tables, fresh bouquets of peonies and orchids arranged just so, and the faint scent of jasmine drifting through open windows. The room buzzed with the kind of polite excitement that only big announcements can bring. Whispers about gowns, venues, and guest lists filling the air like a carefully orchestrated symphony. I'd arrived early, with my camera slung casually over my shoulder, hoping to capture some candid, joyful moments. I wanted to chronicle the beginning of what was supposed to be a new chapter for Morgan, and maybe, for the family as a whole. My heart was full of cautious hope. But from the moment I stepped inside, a strange chill had settled over me. People smiled politely but avoided lingering looks, and the conversations dipped into quiet hushes as I passed by. It was subtle, but it stung, like an invisible barrier closing around me. I tried to focus on the happy moments, the way Morgan's eyes shone as she unveiled her engagement ring, the way Kyle laughed and clinked glasses with distant cousins, but my attention kept drifting to Mum and Aunt Janice, standing slightly apart from the group near the grand fireplace. Their voices were low, tinged with frustration. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the words carried clearly through the ornate room, slicing through the chatter like a knife. "It's not just about the photos," Aunt Janice said, her tone tight and defensive. "Victoria, you know what I mean. Hannah's presence at the wedding. It could shift the whole dynamic." Victoria's voice wavered, caught between protectiveness and resignation. "I know, Janice. It's just, she's stunning and too polished. If she's there, everyone will notice her. Maybe more than Morgan. This is Morgan's day. We can't have anything distracting from her." I felt something freeze in my chest. "Too polished?" I whispered to myself. The air seemed to thicken, and for a moment, I wrestled with disbelief. Were they seriously suggesting I was a threat? Janice pressed on, her voice dropping even lower. "It's about the dream wedding, Victoria. Morgan spent months planning every detail. The spotlight has to stay on her. Hannah's beauty, her presence. It could overshadow everything. You have to understand." I stood there, invisible but painfully present, feeling the weight of their words like a silent verdict. My beauty, something I'd always thought was a blessing, was now framed as a liability, a danger to family harmony, the very thing that made me too much in their eyes. I wanted to interrupt, to tell them that my life had been intertwined with this family's milestones for years, that I'd poured my heart into documenting their joys, often at my own expense. But no words came. The room suddenly felt suffocating. Later, when the group gathered around the dining table for the official announcement, Victoria pulled me aside with a look I can only describe as conflicted and cold. "Hannah," she said quietly, barely meeting my eyes, "you're not invited to Morgan's wedding." The words felt like a punch beneath the ribs. I blinked, shocked into silence. "I'm sorry," she added, voice soft but firm. "It's for the best. Your presence would ruin the dream wedding. It's not personal. Not personal." The phrase echoed hollowly in my mind. I could see the discomfort on her face, but also an unshakable resolve. Around us, the family continued to chatter, oblivious or unwilling to acknowledge the moment unfolding in the shadows. Some averted their gazes. Others exchanged awkward glances. I tried to hold myself together, to process the humiliation without breaking down. I reminded myself this was just nervous family politics, that perhaps emotions were running high and things would settle. But deep down, a sharp sting took root. Betrayal, wrapped in the guise of care. The warmth I'd hoped for was replaced with cold exclusion. As I walked away, the laughter and clinking glasses felt distant, like echoes from another world where I didn't belong. That afternoon, my mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. How could being too pretty be a reason to bar me from a family event? Why had my years of support and sacrifice meant nothing? Was I really such a threat to Morgan's spotlight? The brunch ended, but the invisible divide between us had only widened, and somewhere inside me a seed of doubt took root, about my place in the family, and about how much longer I could keep pretending everything was fine. After that brutal brunch, I left Aunt Janice's estate with a numbness that settled deep in my bones. The words, "You're not invited," echoed relentlessly in my mind, but I needed to see for myself. Somehow, I needed proof that this exclusion went beyond just a whispered family secret. I wasn't about to accept this vague explanation and pretend it was all some unfortunate misunderstanding. That evening, when I finally collapsed onto the sofa, exhausted and raw, I opened my phone and scrolled through my social media feeds. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just distracted browsing. But then I stumbled across a flood of posts tagged with Dark's Emerson Wedding 2024. Photos, videos, and comments from friends, distant relatives, and even strangers excitedly sharing their invitations and plans for Morgan's upcoming celebration. My heart sank as I clicked through images of impossibly ornate wedding invitations, handcrafted cards embossed with gold leaf, sealed with wax stamps bearing the family crest. Every single one was addressed in elegant calligraphy, sent out to a vast network of people. Cousins I barely knew, old childhood friends, neighbors from towns we'd long left behind. Even family friends who hadn't been close for years were included, their posts showcasing invitations that looked like tiny works of art. But my name was nowhere to be found. Neither was Mark's, nor Lily's. A cold wave crashed over me as I realized that even my own brother, Kyle, was on the guest list. He had always been close to Morgan, of course, but I hadn't expected to see his name among the lucky few. I searched his social media quietly, noticing a carefully worded post about looking forward to celebrating Morgan's big day. All smiles and congratulations. No mention of me. The exclusion wasn't just an oversight or an accident. It was deliberate, a calculated act. I felt my phone slip from my trembling fingers as I leaned back, the room spinning slightly. Months, maybe years, of subtle rejection and frosty silences had culminated in this stark, undeniable reality. I and my family were being erased from the moment, from the legacy. I couldn't believe it. That night, I made the call to Kyle. His voice came through the line, warm but cautious. "Hannah," he said softly, "I wish things were different. I didn't want you to find out like this." I asked him why this was happening, why Mom and Morgan had made this choice. He hesitated, then sighed. "Morgan's scared," he admitted. "She feels like if you're there, everyone will notice you instead of her. It's about the spotlight. Mom's on her side too. She thinks it's for the best. I don't agree, but it's complicated." His words hit me like a second blow. Morgan, my cousin, the person whose milestones I'd cherished and captured through my lens, viewed me as a rival. My own mother, who once told me to choose peace, was complicit in turning me away. I asked him if he'd tried to speak up on my behalf. "I did," Kyle said quietly, "but the family's already made up their minds. They're worried about drama, about the wedding being perfect. They want no distractions." Distractions. The irony stung. They saw me, the person who had given so much, worked tirelessly, and poured love into this family, as a threat to their carefully constructed image. After the call, I sat alone in the dark, feeling a cold emptiness spread through me. The weight of invisible walls closing in was suffocating. I had always thought family meant unconditional love, acceptance, and shared history. But now, it felt like a performance, a hierarchy where my place had been quietly erased. I thought about Mark and Lily, who were caught in the crossfire without a voice. How would I explain to my daughter that she wasn't welcome at a family event that was supposed to celebrate love and unity? How could I reconcile the woman I'd been, hopeful, supportive, and loyal, with the woman sitting here now, grappling with betrayal? But beneath the pain, A quiet spark of resolve began to flicker. If the family wanted to exclude me, then I would find another way to be seen, to reclaim my story, to stand on my own terms. That night, I started drafting the difficult conversations I'd need to have with Victoria. I knew confrontation was inevitable, but I also knew one thing more clearly than ever. I couldn't stay silent any longer. The fractures that had long existed were now laid bare, impossible to ignore, and somehow, that painful clarity was the first step toward whatever came next. That night, when I finally found myself alone in the quiet of my living room, the weight of everything crashed down like a tidal wave. The house was still except for the soft hum of the city beyond the windows and the gentle breathing of Lily, asleep in the next room. Mark had already turned in. Exhausted by the day's tense phone calls and awkward family encounters, I sat curled on the couch, my camera bag tossed carelessly aside, and let the silence stretch around me. I pulled out my phone again, hesitant but restless, scrolling through old photos I'd taken at family events, snapshots of laughter, hugs, carefully staged group shots, moments I'd captured hoping to preserve the ties that felt so fragile. Each image was a testament to years of invisible labor, editing hours on end, negotiating family personalities, smoothing over ruffled feathers. They were also a diary of pain, smiles forced where disappointment lurked, a photographer's gaze documenting her own growing isolation. I thought about the countless times I'd brushed off small cuts, the subtle eye rolls when I suggested a better lighting setup, the quiet dismissal of my ideas during wedding planning meetings, the way my contributions were minimized as just expected. I remembered how I'd always pushed down the sting of being the other cousin, the one who was competent, but never quite enough to be celebrated. I'd told myself these were just family quirks, trivial sacrifices to keep the peace. But now, that narrative was unraveling. Grief rose in my chest, the deep, aching sorrow of being excluded from something so fundamental, not just from a party or a ceremony, but from the shared experience that binds a family together. I mourned the idea of a mother who couldn't see me as more than a threat, a cousin who feared my presence, and a family that chose image over love. It felt like a betrayal stitched into the very fabric of my identity. But then, the grief twisted into something sharper, more fierce, anger, a slow-burning fire kindling beneath my skin. How petty, how cruel to cast me out for being too pretty, as if a woman's worth in a room could be measured by who outshined whom. How shallow to reduce a lifetime of support, sacrifices, and love to a threat, an obstacle to a dream wedding. That anger was a bitter medicine, but also a cleansing force, burning away the fog of denial I'd lived under for so long. I realized I'd been blinded by hope, hoping that my loyalty and hard work would eventually be enough to break through the walls of favoritism and jealousy, hoping that my mother's protective instincts would shield me from family politics instead of weaponizing them, hoping that Morgan, whom I'd admired and supported, would see me as an ally instead of a rival. But the truth was undeniable now. The family's dynamics were controlled by insecurity and control, not love and acceptance. Morgan's insecurities had driven her to shape a world where only she could be the star. Victoria's loyalty had morphed into complicity, sacrificing her own daughter on the altar of a perfect family image. Aunt Janice's influence had cemented the hierarchy, ensuring anyone who threatened it was silenced or sidelined. The cracks in the family's polished facade revealed a toxic undercurrent of manipulation and exclusion. I was not alone in feeling the sting, just the most visible casualty. As I sat there in the dim light, I saw clearly that this wasn't about me being too much or not enough. It was about power and control disguised as concern, about preserving illusions at the expense of real connection. And I was tired of shrinking myself, of pretending the wounds didn't matter, of sacrificing my own worth for a family that refused to see it. A new resolve began to take shape within me, steady and unyielding. I owed no loyalty to a family that denied my value and tried to erase me from their story. I would no longer be complicit in their games or silenced by their jealousy. It was time to reclaim my narrative on my own terms, on terms that honored my truth and my talents. I thought of Mark and Lily, the two people who loved me without conditions, who saw my worth every day. I thought of my camera, the tool that had always empowered me to tell stories, stories that mattered, stories that revealed truth beneath the surface gloss. I knew this was a turning point. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. As the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet awakening to the power of boundaries, self-respect, and the freedom that comes from stepping out of a shadow and into my own light. The family's toxic cycle would no longer define me. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head-on. That night, as the house settled into quiet darkness and Lily's soft breathing filled the room next door, I finally let my guard down, and the storm inside me grew louder. I was no longer willing to accept the vague excuses, the subtle slights, or the cold shoulder wrapped in family politics. I needed a plan, not a reckless confrontation fueled by raw emotion, but a strategic response that put me back in control, not just of the narrative, but of my own dignity. I began by mapping out the ways the Emerson family had, for years, depended on me without truly appreciating the cost. Photography was only the surface. I was the family's unofficial archivist, the one who preserved their memories in flawless images. My camera lens had been a tool to make them shine, to hide cracks beneath layers of digital polish. I provided social media content that painted the perfect picture of family harmony, crafting posts that drew admiration and kept their public image intact. And beyond the camera, I had quietly financed emergencies, coordinated last-minute logistics, and absorbed emotional labor that no one else seemed to notice. But what did I have to show for all of that? Nothing but exclusion and silence. I knew I couldn't simply fade away or stay trapped in their narrative, the story they wrote without me, about me. So I began collecting evidence, not out of spite, but out of necessity. My phone became a repository for screenshots of text messages where Victoria dismissed me, emails from Janice arranging family events without my knowledge, and voice messages where relatives whispered about me as if I were a scandalous secret. Each piece was a puzzle fragment, illustrating the deliberate effort to exclude and undermine me. I spent hours combing through old photographs, looking not only for moments I'd captured, but for signs of how my presence had been minimized or erased. I reviewed social media posts related to Morgan's wedding and saw the glaring absence of any credit for my work, the subtle hints that my contributions were invisible. It was painful, but it was also empowering to see the whole picture laid bare in front of me. Then came the practical side of things. I consulted my lawyer, someone I'd trusted for years with my business matters, sharing the family saga carefully. I wanted to protect the work I'd created, the photos, the editing, the creative concepts that the Emersons had used freely without proper acknowledgement or compensation. My lawyer helped me understand my rights and the legal protections I could put in place to prevent the family from exploiting my work any longer. It was a small step toward reclaiming what was mine. Financially, I began separating my assets and setting new boundaries. I changed passwords on shared cloud albums and accounts that had been managed informally for years. I transferred joint accounts to my name alone, ensuring that I had control over my own resources and no longer unwittingly supported a family dynamic that felt so toxic. It was uncomfortable. There was guilt attached to cutting these ties, but also liberating. At the same time, I started drafting a message I knew I'd eventually have to share. Not a public rant or a bitter accusation, but a carefully crafted narrative that revealed the truth with grace and integrity. I wanted my story told on my terms, to confront the hypocrisy and favoritism head-on, without descending into petty family drama. This would be more than a personal reckoning. It would be a statement about self-worth, boundaries, and standing up to injustice. But I also knew timing would be everything. I needed to appear composed, unaffected to the outside world, even as I braced myself for the emotional upheaval to come. So I began to pull back subtly, responding less frequently to family texts, declining informal invites with polite excuses, no longer offering free photography or favors. At first, Victoria and Janice seemed to write it off as a temporary phase, a reaction to hurt feelings. They didn't see the foundation I was laying beneath these small changes. To mark a symbolic break from the past and to reclaim my own story, I booked a personal photo shoot in Venice. something I'd dreamed of for years but postponed for family obligations. It was more than just an artistic project. It was my declaration of independence. The shoot would capture me not as an accessory to someone else's story, but as the protagonist of my own. Every move was calculated, but quiet, an invisible choreography designed to regain power without burning bridges prematurely. I wasn't ready for war. I wanted respect, transparency, and acknowledgement, but I was done being invisible. The family still didn't realize the storm I was building beneath my calm exterior. They mistook my silence for submission, my withdrawal for forgiveness. But inside, I was gathering strength, ready to reveal the truth when the moment was right. And nothing about that moment would be accidental. The night stretched on as I thought through every detail, how I would tell my story, who I would confide in, how to protect my family from further hurt. The weight of betrayal had transformed into a steady resolve. I was no longer willing to be the quiet victim. My narrative, my worth, and my dignity would no longer be controlled by others. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and pain, a fierce hope began to grow. The hope that by standing up for myself, I could finally find the respect and peace I deserved. After that gut punch of exclusion, I realized that the old ways of interacting with my family, the automatic yeses, the quiet sacrifices, the endless goodwill, had to stop. It wasn't easy. For years, I had been the glue holding the Emerson family's social image together, quietly supporting events, offering my photography skills for free, and smoothing over tensions behind the scenes. But suddenly, I saw that my generosity had been taken for granted, even weaponized to keep me at arm's length. So I started to pull back, deliberately, but carefully. At first, it was small changes that might seem invisible to anyone else but felt monumental to me. When my phone buzzed with calls or texts from Victoria or Aunt Janice, I didn't answer right away. I let messages sit unread for longer than I ever had before. When I did respond, my replies were polite but short, no longer laced with the warmth or eagerness I used to show. Invitations to informal get-togethers, casual brunches, or last-minute family dinners stopped getting enthusiastic acceptances. Instead, I declined with gentle but firm excuses: work deadlines, prior commitments, or needing time with Mark and Lily. I wasn't shutting the door completely, but I was closing it just enough to protect myself. More significantly, I stopped offering my photography services for free. This was perhaps the hardest boundary of all. For years, I had been the family's go-to photographer, capturing milestone moments without asking for a dime, because I believed in family, because I hoped that my work would earn me belonging. But now, I began to insist on formal agreements and fair compensation for any professional photography related to family events. I drafted clear contracts outlining my creative rights and payment terms, determined to ensure my contributions were recognized not just as favors, but as professional services. The first time I sent one of those contracts to Victoria's event planner, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and empowerment. It was a subtle but unmistakable message. I was no longer their invisible asset. I also changed all the passwords on the shared family photo albums and cloud storage accounts. For years, the Emersons had accessed these albums freely, sometimes sharing, sometimes deleting photos without consulting me. Now, I took back control. I moved the albums to private accounts only Mark and I could access. It was a digital reclaiming of my work and my story, no longer allowing others to curate or manipulate my photographs without permission. Along with that, I quietly transferred joint financial assets related to family event expenses into accounts solely under my name. Those transactions, once casual and trusting, now required paperwork and accountability. The financial entanglements that had blurred boundaries were being untangled. All these changes felt like ripples beneath the calm surface of family life. To the Emersons, my gradual withdrawal appeared as a passing phase, a reaction to hurt feelings that would fade eventually. Victoria and Aunt Janice slipped into conversations about how Hannah was just overwhelmed, or needing some space. They didn't suspect the quiet storm I was brewing beneath my composed exterior. Not yet. To mark this shift outwardly and inwardly, I booked a personal photo shoot in Venice, a project I'd dreamed of for years, but had always postponed for family or work obligations. The trip was both an artistic venture and a symbolic break, a declaration that I was stepping out of the shadows of the Emerson family drama to reclaim my identity on my own terms. Venice's winding canals and sunlit piazzas would be the backdrop for images that spoke of freedom, beauty, and resilience. Rather than capturing someone else's story, I would be the star of my own. Inside me, the tension between the pain of exclusion and the power of choice grew. With every polite refusal, with every professional contract sent, with every password reset, I was building a foundation for something new. Something where respect, acknowledgement, and fairness were not optional, but non-negotiable. I wasn't just withdrawing, I was preparing for a reckoning. The family still didn't see the magnitude of what was happening. They mistook my silence for submission, my measured distance for eventual forgiveness. They kept planning, celebrating, and basking in the glow of Morgan's upcoming wedding, unaware that I was quietly gathering strength, evidence, and clarity. The invisible lines of loyalty and obligation I had once followed were now redrawn, and nothing about this new chapter would be left to chance. Sitting in my quiet home, I often reflected on the camera bag sitting untouched beside me, the symbol of my professional life and personal empowerment. The Venice shoot was more than just photos. It was a beacon signaling the end of invisibility and the beginning of reclaiming my narrative, my dignity, and my voice. Whatever happened next, I knew it wouldn't be on their terms, and that truth gave me a fierce, steady hope that I could no longer ignore. The day I released my Venice wedding shoot online felt like stepping onto a stage under blinding lights, except this time, I was no longer hiding backstage. For years, my camera had captured the Emerson family's grand moments, the laughter, the tears, the glittering celebrations, but never my own story told through my own lens. Venice was different. The shimmering canals, the ancient stone bridges, the golden light at sunset, all of it was more than just a backdrop. It was a metaphor for escape and rebirth, and I was finally the protagonist. I remember the exact moment I hit publish on my website, sharing the gallery with the world. The photos were raw yet elegant, intimate yet bold. I wore a flowing silk dress that caught the breeze like a wave, standing on a tiny gondola as it slid silently beneath the Rialto Bridge. My hair caught the waning sun, framing my face with a glow that reflected not just light, but something deeper: freedom, resilience, and the quiet strength I'd been cultivating. The shoot wasn't just about beauty, it was a reclamation. Each image was an act of defiance against years of feeling unseen, a declaration that I had worth beyond the roles I'd been assigned. The captions told pieces of my story, not with bitterness, but with honesty. I wrote about finding peace in solitude, about the layered complexities of family, and about the power of choosing self-love over toxic acceptance. Within hours, the post started to ripple through social media. My Instagram notifications exploded, the likes, the comments, the shares scrolling past faster than I could read. The hashtag #OurVeniceWithHannah began trending in photography circles and beyond. Influencers and everyday viewers alike were captivated by the authenticity radiating through the frames. Friends messaged me with heartfelt congratulations. Strangers left comments about how the shoot inspired them to embrace their own beauty and worth. Then came the numbers that stunned me. 3.5 million views in less than a week. It was surreal. The very family who had shut me out was now watching too. But this time, it wasn't in hushed whispers or cold silences. It was public, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Alongside the images, I released a carefully written essay. I wasn't out for revenge or drama. I wanted to shine a light on the truth, to show that exclusion and favoritism had a cost far deeper than the surface glitter of a perfect wedding. I recounted my journey, the sacrifices, the sidelining, and the moment I was told I was too pretty to attend. I backed it up with evidence. Screenshots of messages, invitations that never came, and emails where my contributions were dismissed without thanks. The piece was raw, but measured, a blend of vulnerability and strength. The response was overwhelming. Comments flooded in from people who had experienced similar family dynamics, who understood the pain of being sidelined by jealousy or insecurity. Support poured in from photographers, women, and anyone who had ever felt too much or not enough in their own lives. The Emerson family's carefully curated image began to crack in the light of public scrutiny. Private family groups buzzed with uneasy conversations, and some distant relatives reached out privately to express regret. Morgan's social media accounts were flooded with questions and subtle jabs from followers who had read my essay. Victoria's usual composed posts grew defensive, betraying cracks in the polished facade. For me, there was a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because my truth was finally heard, because my work was recognized on a scale I never imagined, but sorrow for the pain that had led to this moment, the betrayal of family, the loss of trust, and the realization that some wounds ran deeper than I'd hoped. Yet, even as the world watched, I felt a powerful sense of control. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a storyteller, an artist, and a woman who refused to be erased. The Venice shoot was my message. I was here, I was radiant, and I was no longer bound by the shadows of family expectations. The fallout was only beginning, but I was ready. This was my moment to rise, to reclaim not just my place in the story, but the story itself. The next chapter would demand courage, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it head-on. The moment the Venice photo shoot went viral, I could almost feel the Emerson family's carefully constructed world begin to tremble beneath their feet. It wasn't just a matter of pride or ego anymore. This was public, undeniable. The $650,000 wedding, with all its glitter and grandeur, suddenly had a glaring spotlight pointed at the fissures beneath its polished surface. Almost immediately, whispers started circulating through family circles and social gatherings that had once been so eager to celebrate Morgan's big day. Invitations that had been sent out with flourish were suddenly being rescinded, or quietly lost. Friends and acquaintances who'd been excited to attend found themselves receiving vague apologies or last-minute cancellations as the family scrambled to control the narrative that was now spiraling out of control. Victoria and Morgan, once so sure of their control, were thrown into panic mode. Victoria's usual composed facade cracked in small but telling ways. I caught glimpses through mutual friends of frantic phone calls, pleas to smooth things over, messages begging certain relatives not to make a scene, and even private apologies sent to those who had publicly expressed support for me. Morgan's social media, once a perfectly curated highlight reel, became a battleground. Comments flooded in, some supportive, many probing, questions about why her cousin had been excluded, and why the family seemed so quick to brush it all under the rug. I knew they were desperate to douse the fire before it spread too far. I saw Victoria's posts carefully crafted to project unity and gratitude, thanking guests for their support, but saying nothing about the controversy. Morgan, meanwhile, posted glamorous wedding preparations and heartfelt messages about love and family, as if trying to rewrite the story in real time. But the cracks were too wide now. The public wasn't blind. They could see the tension behind the smiles. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere was tense and fractured. Victoria confided in a close friend that she felt trapped by the fallout, torn between protecting Morgan's image and grappling with the growing backlash. Morgan herself was reported to be isolated by the situation, stripped of the quiet support she once took for granted, namely, mine. Without my presence and professional skills behind the scenes, the pressure mounted on her shoulders in ways she hadn't anticipated. My brother Kyle, who had always been the family's peacemaker, found himself caught in the middle like never before. He reached out to me often, his voice heavy with frustration and sadness. "I'm trying to make things right, Hannah," he said during one of our conversations, "but it feels like all I do just stirs the pot more. They don't want to listen. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about how the family looks." Kyle's words echoed what I was beginning to see clearly. The family's image, their social standing, was unraveling. The apology posts and private messages couldn't fully erase the damage caused by the revelations. Invitations rescinded and private insults exposed in messages that circulated beyond the family bubbled up in whispers at social events, damaging their reputation. People began asking uncomfortable questions about fairness, about loyalty, about the cost of putting appearances above genuine connection. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, Victoria and Morgan's attempts at damage control often bordered on desperate and insincere. Their apologies, when they came, felt rehearsed and hollow, carefully worded to minimize fault, to shift blame, to salvage what remained of their social standing. Victoria sent a private message to me one evening, laden with agonizing words. "Hannah, please forgive us. We never wanted to hurt you. This has gone too far. Let's find a way back." But beneath the words, I could sense the same old justification, the same old dismissal of my pain as collateral damage in their quest for perfection. Morgan's messages were more guarded, oscillating between defensiveness and moments of vulnerability. "I didn't want to hurt you," she wrote in one text, "but I had to think about the wedding. Everyone was watching. It was never meant to be personal." But the damage was done. The golden child's crown had lost its shine, tarnished by the truth I laid bare. Throughout it all, I maintained my firm stance. The love bombing and guilt trips poured in, calls from Victoria begging me to be the bigger person, texts from Morgan expressing regret, even whispered attempts by other relatives to persuade me to forgive and forget. But I knew that forgiveness without respect and acknowledgement was meaningless. I wasn't about to be manipulated back into a role where my worth was conditional and my presence a threat. As the public sided with me, the family's internal dynamics began shifting in real time. Morgan, once surrounded by admirers and allies, now faced isolation. Without my discreet support behind the camera and behind the scenes, the cracks widened. She was no longer the untouchable star. She was vulnerable, exposed not just by the scandals, but by the absence of the cousin who had once been her quiet anchor. For me, this was complicated territory. I didn't relish the suffering of my family, but I also refused to erase my own pain for the sake of preserving a fragile facade. The fallout was painful, yes, but it was also a reckoning long overdue. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer silent. The story had changed, and the Emerson family would have to face the consequences that come with truth laid bare. But the next steps, and how far this would go, were still unfolding. The storm had been unleashed. Now it was time to see how the family would weather it. The wedding day arrived with all the fanfare and extravagance that the Emerson name demanded. Ornate floral arrangements, a live string quartet, and guests impeccably dressed in designer gowns and tuxedos. But beneath the surface of the glittering soiree, cracks were beginning to show, cracks that no amount of decor or champagne could conceal. Without me behind the lens and quietly managing logistics, the day quickly spiraled into a series of mishaps. The hired photographer, a last-minute replacement, lacked both the familiarity with the family and the skill to capture the subtle moments that make a wedding truly memorable. I had spent years understanding each member of the Emerson clan, the way they moved, their expressions, their dynamics, and I knew how to anticipate the moments to catch the perfect shot. This new photographer missed many of those fleeting glances, the quiet smiles, the tears restrained in the corners of eyes. Instead, the images came back stiff and generic, lacking the warmth and intimacy that my work always brought. Guests whispered about delayed schedules, ceremonies running late, the florist mixing up centerpiece orders, the caterer missing dietary requests. The meticulous timeline Morgan had insisted on was unraveling. The video stream for distant relatives glitching repeatedly left many unable to witness the ceremony in real time. I heard murmurs about confusion over seating arrangements, with some VIP guests accidentally left without escorts or assigned seats. The Emerson's social scene was known for its precision and polish, but this day was feeling disjointed, chaotic even. The financial repercussions were immediate and harsh. The vendor cancellations and last-minute fixes ran up costs far beyond the original $650,000 budget. Morgan's carefully planned extravagance was bleeding money. And for what? An event that, despite its glamour, felt hollow and fraught with tension. Family members exchanged terse glances, frustrations mounting behind forced smiles. The carefully constructed image of a perfect wedding was cracking in real time. Victoria faced mounting criticism from extended family and close friends, who had once admired her poise and management skills. Behind the scenes, conversations turned blunt and unforgiving. "You let this happen," I heard one relative whisper to a confidant. "She pushed out the only person who could have kept things together." Another remarked, "It's like the family forgot who was really holding the threads." Victoria's composure began to fray. Once a figure of strength and protector of family unity, she found herself caught between defending Morgan's choices and confronting the very real fallout. The whispered reproaches and pointed questions left her defensive and isolated. In private moments, I knew she wrestled with guilt, but publicly, she maintained a guarded front, unwilling or unable to admit the cost of their decisions. Some family members, who had remained silent during the exclusion, now voiced quiet regrets. A distant aunt reached out to me, her voice measured with sorrow. "This was never meant to happen, Hannah. We all wanted you there." Others expressed frustration at the stubbornness of Victoria and Janice, who refused to acknowledge the damage caused. Yet, Aunt Janice, the matriarch who had long enforced the family's status quo, dug in her heels. She dismissed the fallout as the inevitable consequence of misunderstandings and accused me quite openly in some circles of seeking attention and disrupting family harmony. Her words cut sharply, reinforcing the divide rather than healing it. It was as if acknowledging any fault would unravel the carefully maintained hierarchy she had upheld for decades. The Emerson family's reputation began to falter locally. Friends and acquaintances whispered about the public drama, questioning the family's narrative and their true values. Invitations to social events became fewer, and the glossy veneer of perfection began to dull. The family's influence, long buoyed by appearances and alliances, faced a subtle but significant erosion. Through it all, I remained focused and steady. I documented the fallout, not with malice, but with clarity. My camera continued to capture the moments of tension, the cracks in smiles, the silent distances between those who once claimed closeness. My work no longer served to gloss over imperfections, but to reveal truths. At the same time, I dedicated myself to healing and rebuilding. With Mark and Lily's unwavering support, I began refocusing on my career and personal growth, setting boundaries that had long been overdue. The painful family drama fueled a new chapter, one defined not by approval or exclusion, but by self-respect and authentic connection. The days following the wedding were a reckoning. The Emersons now faced the consequences of excluding me, the one who had silently held so much of their history and image together. But as the family's fractures widened, I understood that change, whether growth or further dysfunction, was inevitable. The question remained, which path would they choose? The moment I set those boundaries in place, the dynamics shifted irrevocably. The Emerson family, once accustomed to my quiet acquiescence, had to face a new reality. I was no longer the ever-available, invisible support system they could rely on without acknowledgement. Now, I controlled access, on my terms, with clear rules, or not at all. It wasn't an easy transformation. For years, I had been the one who smoothed tensions, organized logistics, and lent my talents without question. Now, even the smallest interaction came with conditions. Calls from Victoria would go unanswered for hours, sometimes days. Texts asking for favors received polite refusals or requests for formal agreements. Invitations to casual events stopped arriving altogether. The space I carved out was deliberate, a protective barrier, a declaration of self-worth. I remember one particularly tense moment when Victoria reached out late one night, her message dripping with a mixture of desperation and hurt. "Hannah, please talk to me. We can work this out. Family first." I read it twice, then typed a careful reply. Family first means respect first. Until that changes, I need distance. That distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional and psychological. It was a refusal to be drawn back into the toxic cycle of favoritism and conditional love. It was a stand against being the family's invisible asset, the scapegoat for their insecurities. It was a reclaiming of my narrative. Setting these boundaries was as much about protecting my peace as it was about teaching a lesson, that love and family cannot be weaponized to diminish someone's worth. I made it clear that contact had to be rooted in mutual respect and honesty. No more secrets, no more exclusion disguised as protection. The message was firm but fair. I wasn't closing the door forever, but I was no longer willing to be a doormat. The response from the Emersons was mixed, predictable in some ways, but still painful. Victoria oscillated between attempts at reconciliation and moments of stubborn denial. Morgan, stripped of her golden child aura, seemed isolated, no longer able to rely on my silent support or professional skill behind the scenes. Aunt Janice dug in her heels, dismissing my stance as self-serving and divisive. And Kyle, ever the mediator, found himself caught in the middle, trying and failing to bridge a widening chasm. Meanwhile, my own life began to flourish in ways I hadn't dared imagine before. Freed from the exhausting burden of unreciprocated loyalty, I leaned into my passions and my family, the two people who had never wavered in their love and support. Mark became my unwavering anchor, reminding me daily that my worth was intrinsic, unshaken by others' opinions. Lily, my little girl, blossomed in a home where her mother was no longer invisible, but radiant and unapologetically herself. I poured energy into my photography business, taking on projects that excited me and expanded my creative horizons beyond the Emerson sphere. The Venice shoot was just the beginning, a symbolic first breath of freedom. Each new assignment was a step toward building an identity that wasn't tethered to family expectations, but rooted in my own dreams and talents. The boundaries I established extended beyond physical distance. They became a framework for emotional safety and personal growth. I learned to say no without guilt, to protect my time and energy fiercely. I cultivated friendships and professional relationships where respect and kindness were givens, not privileges earned through sacrifice. I found peace in solitude and strength in vulnerability. At times, I still felt the sting of absence, the holidays without shared traditions, the missed celebrations, the silence where once there had been chatter and laughter. But I also recognized that some wounds need space and time to heal, that true family is defined not by blood alone, but by honor, respect, and upliftment. The Emersons faced their own reckoning. Their social standing, once seemingly untouchable, had begun to crack under the pressure of public scrutiny and private regrets. Invitations dwindled, whispers grew louder, and the facade of effortless perfection faded. Whether they chose to grow, to confront their biases and mend the fractures, or to double down on denial and exclusion, was no longer my burden. For me, the lesson was clear and unyielding. True family loves without conditions, sees without judgment, and uplifts without exclusion. I had been a casualty of their fear and envy, but I refused to be defined by their choices any longer. The story continues, but I now hold the pen. I write my chapters with resilience, with boundaries, and with a fierce commitment to self-worth. The Emerson name may carry history and weight, but my name carries strength and freedom. And that, above all else, is mine to keep.